The best way to begin 2024 is with a Queens Public Library card. Get access to all our materials, including books, ebooks, e-magazines, music, movies, and more. Apply in person at your nearest QPL location or get an e-card online at queenslibrary.org. Join us at Queens Public Library as we honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We'll be offering programs for all ages in tribute to Dr. King and recommendations for books and films that celebrate his extraordinary life and legacy. Learn more on our website at queenslibrary.org. Visit QPL for a healthy start to your new year. Regardless of your age or fitness level, developing and maintaining healthy habits begins with mind, body, and community. Join us for a variety of health and wellness classes for kids, teens, adults, and older adults at our locations across Queens. For more information, visit queenslibrary.org.
Welcome to Queens Public Library's talk with Ira Sachs, the co-writer and director of the feature film Passages. The Hollywood Reporter states, caustically amusing, sexy, sad, and unflinchingly intense. This is an intimate study of the formation and collapse of a romantic triangle, played with an invigorating absence of sentiment by three actors at the top of their game. New York Magazine Vulture declares Ira Sachs is a master of the small, delicate gestures that wind up having seismic repercussions in our lives. In Passages, which might be his masterpiece, he fashions the most delectably ruinous of love triangles. Time Magazine writes, this is a smart, lustrous film, and a bracingly honest one, the kind of movie that leaves you feeling both invigorated and a little blue. The Los Angeles Times exclaims, a film that is profoundly real, impactful, and even uncomfortable, but above all, is an artistic and complex story about three people confronted with their own sense of morality. Hi, I'm Brian Alessandro. I have written for Interview Magazine, Newsday, Pank, Huffington Post, Lambda Literary, The Gay and Lesbian Review, and have recently co-adapted Edmund White's A Boy's Own Story into a graphic novel for Top Shelf Productions. Additionally, I co-edited Fever Spores, The Queer Reclamation of William S. Burroughs, an anthology of essays and interviews about Burroughs for Rebel Satori Press. I'm also the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the literary journal, The New Engagement. My first novel, The Unmentionable Mon, was published in 2015 by Cairn Press, and my first feature film, Afghan Hound, was produced by Marriott Media in 2011. It is currently streaming on Plex, Tubi, and Amazon. My new novel, Performa non grata, was released in April 2023 by Rebel Satori Press. Culture Connection, curated by Daniel Zaleski and now in its 10th year at the Queens Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talent to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, author talks, and film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. Ira Sachs is the writer and director of 8 feature films, including Keep the Lights On in 2012, Love is Strange in 2014, Little Men in 2016, Frankie in 2019, and of course Passages in 2023. He has won a Sundance Film Festival Grand Jury Prize, a Berlin Film Festival Teddy Award, a Cahiers du Cinema Best of the Year Award, and many others. Passages has been nominated for 4 Independent Spirit Awards, including Best Director and Best Picture. It is one of my personal favorite films of 2023, and I am honored to have Ira on our show this evening. Thank you so much for joining us, Ira.
Thank you, Brian, for that introduction. It's great to be here.
My pleasure. So, Ira, for those of our viewers who have not yet had a chance to see Passages, would you please provide a very brief plot summary?
Sure. Plot is very important. It's the story of a couple, 2 men who've been together for a while, and the woman that one of them has a relationship with. So it's a film to some extent about getting together and then unraveling. It's a combustible story of 3 people tied together in ways that are both comfortable and uncomfortable.
and really, I think, fascinating and kind of novel on some level. I think when I wrote to you back in August after seeing it, I really feel like you are charting a new path in queer cinema, honestly, because we don't often see. We'll get to Martin and Tomas in a second, but their characters are very unique, I think, in the pantheon of film, queer film protagonists. You really do present a very thoughtful depiction of fluid sexuality. The protagonist, Thomas, is married to Martin, a man. He identifies as gay, correct me if I'm wrong, but he falls in love with and has an affair with a woman, Agathe. You pronounce her name Agathe, right?
Yeah.
Beyond the possibility of Thomas being bisexual, is it the idea that he falls in love with the person or the soul rather than a body? And even more, what does Agathe serve him? Is she kind of there as a sort of maternal figure? Do
No,
you think you might
no,
view
I
her
don't.
that way?
No, I mean, I try to make films that are that leave space for everyone's interpretation. I mean, I think there's a strict storyline, there's a plot as that sort of carries the film, but there's also a lot of openness. So I think whatever I say might be different than what you see.
Sure.
We see different things. I think for me, what's interesting about the film is when I wrote the script with Mauricio Zacharias, my longtime co-writer, we thought that this story about a man who's identified as gay, who's in a long-term gay relationship, who has starts a relationship with a woman, that would be really a critical moment in the film when he decides, and it's not. It's like the film ends up paying almost no attention to I've been married for 17. I've been my partner for 17 years. I've been a gay man since I've been alive.
Right.
So I think if I suddenly started a relationship with a woman, it would be quite surprising to everyone around me. That's not the case with Tomas. And I think in a way, what you're seeing is a difference in a generation. It becomes really a film about these three individuals and their identity, while not being meaningless. I would almost say their gender, in terms of how they deal with power, is more important than how they deal with sexuality.
That's interesting. Say more about that. I did get a sense of that, particularly coming from Tomas.
Well, I think that was an initial interest of my own and of my co-writer, was to really write a film about what it is to be a man with power and what you do with that power when you have it. And I think to some extent it came of a feeling that I had during the lockdown, during the beginning of, during 2020, that I shouldn't be in this situation, that somehow this is trapped. And I sort of thought, and that I should have other things than I was having. And there was this way, why do I believe that I should always have more? And I think Tomas is a character who has a lot and always wants more. And what's effective is to want more means there's a gap between what you have and what you're aspiring to have. And that gap is where drama comes in.
Is it fair to call him entitled or even a narcissist?
I would actually probably use entitled more than a narcissist. Many people have labeled him a narcissist, and somehow to me that doesn't seem to describe Tomas exactly, because he is also very focused on other people. He's a seducer.
Yeah.
And so he's not always needing to be in the center of attention. He just always needs to connect.
Yes, I see that. That's interesting.
And so to me, that being said, he is a man who's very who expects the world to circle around him. And I think that's where you get the feeling of his entitlement. But he's not alone in being entitled. He's both someone that people revile, but also I think people can find familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see it by the end, how badly bruised he ends up and how badly bruised he leaves others without, I think, intention. I don't think there's any malice, and I don't think that there's any, maybe a little bit of self-absorption, less than selfishness. And I think these kinds of people, they are desperate to connect. They are desperate to be with the other. But then I think on some level, they end up taking them as options, maybe without realizing it. and that could be a little bit painful for the object, the love object.
Well, I have to say that Trump was on our mind.
Well,
And
interesting.
in some ways and it's not a portrait of it's a portrait of so many men.
Sure.
And again, I see myself to some extent in that figure. I don't think so. I say that because you can look at Trump's ability to cause pain as being truly sociopathic. At the same time, he seems incredibly vulnerable, right? Like there's a way in which he's very thin-skinned and can be very hurt. And I think that's somehow is something that I find very interesting. And I'd say the film, though it's not a highly judgmental film, it does start with a character who begins on a pedestal and it ends with that same character on the floor.
Yeah.
So there is a kind of pleasure that the audience can take.
That shape is in bringing him down, and that shape of your film is really beautiful. And something you do just to circle back to something you just said a minute ago about how you tell a story with a lot of negative space and a lot of ambiguity, at least enough to provide each viewer their own projection, right? Like a Rorschach, what they will and what they're going to take from it. And the other point you raised that I wanted to bring up is a lot of the friends that I have who are in their 20s or 30s, when they watched the film, they were like, yeah, I mean, they would say to me, Brian, as a 47-year-old man, you're being so binary and trying to label them. This for us in our generation is a non-issue. And I thought that was very interesting, getting to the point that you made earlier about generational divide.
Yeah, I think that this film is sort of testament to that difference in this moment. And I definitely, once I noticed that, I let it go. Like it isn't the subject of the film. It isn't.
Right.
There's something else that ends up going on between the three characters, and also there's a lot that goes on between these three actors.
Yes, the chemistry is extraordinary.
You're watching actors create intimacy together, and they seem, fully human. So
yeah, absolutely. Talk to me a little bit about your writing process with Maurizio, because you've worked with him on Keep the Lights On, Frankie, Little Men, Love is Strange. This one, it's a long time collaboration.
Yes. Well, I think in some extent my art form, and maybe this is true for many film directors, but I would describe that my talent lies in my ability to collaborate. Like I really like collaboration. I get inspired by it. I'm not a novelist. I work in groups, and I think Maurizio and we really complement each other. He has a lot of skills that I don't have, in the sense that he has a level of craft. So what we end up doing is we spend a couple of months, sometimes 2, sometimes 5, figuring out the exact structure of the film and a very thorough outline, scene by scene by scene by scene by scene. And often that comes from using as a template another film that we've seen or that I've seen and I've brought to the table. In the case of Passages, you can look at Visconti. Luchino Visconti's last film is called The Innocent, and it's about an aristocratic man with a mistress and a wife, and somehow he begins at the pinnacle and he ends up very much on the floor.
Yeah,
a different kind of floor than this one. Let's say in the coffin, and I thought that works, and so you could map the relationship between this film and Love is Strange. There was a 1934 film called Make Way for Tomorrow by
I love that film. It's so beautiful.
Love is Strange is a loose remake of Make Way for Tomorrow. So that's often how we work, and then once we have this very rigorous outline, thorough, pretty deep, dense, all the characters, the plot points, then Maurizio goes off and he writes the first draft, and that can take also another 3-6 months, sometimes longer, and then the next draft tends to be mine, and ultimately the final draft is definitely mine and becomes more of a work in progress that becomes influenced by pre-production, casting. We wrote Passages for New York. We ended up in Paris. Suddenly we cast Adele Exarchopoulos. It's a very different film as it's because in some ways every fiction film is a documentary.
Hmm.
Document something that is really there. So the profession that Martin has, for example, was not written into the draft of the script until I found that location, and that becomes a change. So I tend to write the last draft as I approach production.
It's a very organic approach, I think, and yeah, I mean, it becomes its own thing. I mean, I've written and directed one feature film 12 years ago, and you write one script and you write it, and because of my background is fiction writing, you write it like it's a novel, and it's gonna live that way forever, and then it becomes something different when you shoot, and different again when you edit.
That's right.
So it's important, I guess, to be flexible during the process.
Well, it's not even flexible. That's just what happens. You're making different films at each phase. You're making different works at each phase.
Interesting. Speaking of filmmaking, Tomas is a director. He is a filmmaker, the character. And the opening scene, I thought, was very powerful in its foreshadowing on some level of the transitional space that these characters go into throughout the film, this journey that they all embark on. The idea of the staircase, for example, right? When he's working with the actor coming down the staircase into the restaurant. Talk to me a little bit about this idea of transitional spaces and the idea of hallways and staircases. There's a lot of that kind of recurring leitmotif, I think. In the film.
There's a lot of that in all my films. I think in a way, I think of it less as a metaphoric element because I really try to avoid metaphor, to be honest. I try not to think in metaphor. So I didn't think, the stairs are an in-between space. In general, in the films, stairways, sometimes cars, in this film, bicycles, they're places where people are alone. And so the film are often alone or can be alone. And the film, in a way, gets a kind of momentary quiet in those spaces where you can feel and you can observe the character not in connection with other characters, right? It's also, they're kind of spaces that are very private, but often just a little bit public. So at the end of the film, we end up in a hallway in an elementary school, and there's two people who are alone, but they're not alone because there's people inside the rooms next to them. Right. So I like that tension also that places like stairwells and hallways provide.
Shifting gears a bit, what is Agathe, the female lead played by Adele in the film? What do you think she is seeking in her relationship with Tomas? I mean, she seems to initiate on some level the first encounter.
Well, I think what's significant, because I don't think she's ultimately treated so well, and she gets out of these relationships. But each of the characters in this triangle, Martin, Agathe, and Tomas, have their own desire, and they're led by their desires more than a concept of morality. I mean, she arrives in a situation where she knows that the man she's interested in is married to another man, and that doesn't seem to cause her any delay of trying to get what she wants, right? So I think everybody tends to be driven more by their own desires. I think she I think she's open to something which seems there's a class distinction between her and the two men. There's an aspirational quality. She's friends with someone who's in the crew, who has a kind of small part in the crew, and here she is, like, meeting the director. I think there's a obvious sexual charge between these two people that we establish quite quickly. It seems like they have good sex. At least initially, so I think she's young enough to be excited by the things that seem both good and bad.
Speaking to that, you have a really wonderful naturalistic way with actors. How did you come to cast Ben, Franz, and Adele? And then how much room do you give actors to find their characters or to create scenes? It sounds like you're very generous in the process.
We wrote the film for Franz Rogowski. I had seen him in a film by Michael Haneke, the Austrian director.
Yeah, I love it.
Happy End.
Happy End, yeah.
and he's wonderful in the film, and he performs a very memorable karaoke performance of Sia's Chandelier.
Yeah.
That if you haven't, if that's on YouTube, you can find it, and it's
a great
really
film.
worth seeing because it's incredibly compelling. It's very physical. It's really risky. It's funny. It's wonderful. Like
It deals a
Franz,
bit with the migrant crisis also on some level, and
yes,
apathy. Yeah.
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 And so we wrote. I had Franz in mind for years, and then when we decided we were going to make a film about a man with power who loses it, loses a lot of things,
Yeah.
and also is very charismatic. I was like, let's write for that guy. So we wrote for Franz. He ended up wanting to do it, which you never know when you write for an actor, which was great. And then I've seen Ben. I really have been interested in since I saw him in I'm Not There, Todd Haynes' Bob Dylan film.
Yeah.
Adele I saw in Justine Triet. No, I've never seen Blue as the Warm
Oh,
Sky.
interesting.
But I saw her in Triet's last film, which was called Sybil.
Right.
And she
and
was
of course
amazing.
She just did Anatomy of a Fall. She wrote and directed Anatomy of a Fall, which was nominated for a million Oscars.
Yeah, I get excited by certain performances, and it doesn't need to be. It can be 15 minutes. All three of those people I'm describing were in supporting roles, but like I got drawn to them in ways that I thought this is really compelling.
Interesting.
Go ahead.
And then approaching the characters.
Yeah, I don't. I would say the script is 90%. I mean, the film is 90% the script. If you read the script, you would hear almost every line in the script. Most scenes are not improvisational. That being said, two things. One, it's all emotionally very improvisational because I don't rehearse before I start shooting. So there's never a table read. There's never a rehearsal where actors are saying lines and listening to the other actors saying lines.
Is that to preserve spontaneity? And
it's to preserve risk and the unexpected. And to be honest, a shooting day on a film, you're not just shooting it once. You're shooting it 6, 8. You're shooting a lot of different takes, so it becomes a form of rehearsal.
Right.
But I find if I cast the film right, if the script is strong, costumes are very important for defining characters. Then I feel like I've given them everything they need to show up and be and respond to each other.
I'm glad you mentioned costumes. I wanted to talk about the costume design by Khadija Zegai. Am I pronouncing her name correctly?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about how the wardrobes inform the characters? Because it's really incredibly designed. The attire was incredibly well thought out, and I think they really.
I mean, she's wonderful. Yeah. We'd worked together on Frankie. She had done Isabelle Huppert's wardrobe on that film. I showed her films in which costumes have a kind of impact based on color and skin, both those things. So I'm looking at Eric Romer films. I'm looking at Godard's Contempt. I'm looking at Beware of a Holy Whore and Fassbender's film where I remember Hannah Shigula in white. And I remember, there's just, you think in color. And if you think of Contempt, for example, if you think of red and you think of blue and you think of, so I think this sense of like wardrobe is impact, it's poetic impact. And then we decided at a certain point that we were not making a realistic film. And so instead of Adele being in a wardrobe that you would find in the subway of an average Parisian elementary school teacher, she's in clothes that literally Brigitte Bardot might have worn in Contempt.
In Contempt, right? Yeah. As you said that, it occurred to me that I don't think I saw, the film is supposed to be contemporary, right? But I don't think I saw a single cell phone, unless I wasn't paying close enough attention.
There's one scene where he's on a terrace and he calls Martin, but just one.
They're like so ubiquitous nowadays, though. They're like in every shot of every film. So I was like, this is almost like an alternative modern universe in which
Well,
they're
as a
not.
writer, I'm very wary of phones.
Yeah, yeah.
Like because phones are, I mean, you know,
They're a
people have
nuisance sometimes. Yeah,
they're useful, but I think they mean that the film is not happening between people in the present with each other.
yeah.
They're
Okay,
also very hard to shoot in a realistic way, to be honest.
interesting. Um, I have to really commend you for, and I really appreciate you for drawing so heavily from European cinema. It's international cinema has long been my driving force, and you mentioned one of my living heroes is Michael Haneke. So the other thing I wanted to bring up was your sense of blocking, which was really fascinated me. We often have at least 2 or 3 scenes in which Tomas is in the foreground with his back to us, obstructing Martin or Agathe as he's talking to them in separate scenes. I was wondering if this was conscious or if it just sort of happened while you were shooting. It felt very deliberate, this framing, and I'm wondering what you were trying to convey with it.
It's the strategy is not to shoot people from the back, but I don't mind when you shoot people from the back because people are very expressive
Yeah,
in their bodies.
Yeah.
Really, it's that I tend to position the camera in a spot, and I don't cut that much. So, and I'm also not blocking to an exact T. I am blocking everything. I mean, if I'm not rehearsing with the actors, I'm spending 4 or 5 weeks daily with the cinematographer figuring out how bodies are going to move through space. Like the whole movie is storyboarded. I have a very strong sense that you're telling a story through movement and action. So that's my job, is to block, and it's a very important one. But I think what happens is that what's interesting is that by being excluded for the audience, you in some ways feel more included.
Yeah.
Polanski has a really interesting Polanski on Rosemary's Baby. There's a scene with Mia Farrow, and she's sitting in a bedroom, and there's a door frame, and you only see part of her body. And Polanski and she's on a phone. She's on the phone talking to someone, and Polanski imagined the entire audience like trying to look around,
lean over and try to see. Yeah. I found myself doing that in those 2 scenes and passages. I was like, well, I'm so curious to see what.
And that means that you think you're there.
Yeah.
Right? Like that means literally you think you're there, and you forget the camera's there.
I feel like, who does that really well too these days is Wong Kar-wai. I feel like he deliberately withholds, and that's very intriguing.
Well, you say these days. Where do we see?
Well,
I want to see a new Wong Kar-wai film.
I know. I mean, the last thing I think I saw of his was 2046. Or, geez. I know he's working on a new series. He has a new TV cable series in China, but I don't think we can get it yet. And also, we see Franz's back, which you said is very expressive and very beautiful. So I don't mind staring at it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and we see Ben Whisshaw's back in a very important moment.
Oh, yes, we do. Yes. Which I'm going to talk to you about in a second. That. Well, maybe we can just get to it now. The rating, the NC-17 rating. I know much has been made of it. It got a lot of press. There are really just 2 sex scenes in the film, and there were 3. Okay, I'm sorry. You're right. There are 3. There are 3, but I didn't think they were especially explicit or graphic. But they're quite long. Do you think that's why it got hit with the rating?
Yeah, I have a friend who's an art historian at Stanford, Richard Meyer. He's and he's like, it's the duration. It's that by holding the shots, you feel like it's too voyeur. You're too close because it begins to feel real.
But again, that's the effect that you were trying to achieve, and you did, of course.
Of course. I mean, luckily, I got to make the film I wanted to make, and it was released just as I wanted. That being said, that there's a way in which this censorship board is clearly in place to frighten people and to chill the air, and to say, if you show certain images, then there's a good chance you'll be punished. And I was punished. So that's what happened.
But of course, you could show a million dismemberments and decapitations and disembowelments, and that's fine. You'll get an R for that.
Well, this board, you have to keep in mind, this board came directly out of the Hays Code. It's which came from the Catholic Church. So we're like and the fact that it still exists is so
it's It's outrageous.
It's antiquated,
Yes.
but it's also like, the world progress doesn't go in one direction. So it doesn't surprise me.
What was it, in like the 20s or 30s, a man and a woman, if they weren't married, couldn't even sit on the same bed in a film?
Yeah, and movies couldn't. If people do, it was the 30s because the Hays Code didn't come until the 30s. But
30s,
it also included narrative arc. So if someone does something bad in the 40s, they have to be punished. Bad, meaning sexual,
right?
They literally have to be punished if they do crime. So you see all these movies where the last 30, 45 seconds is some redemption or punishment, and it's really just the Hays Code.
It's deranged and really interesting at the same time.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look at the trailer for Passages.
Thanks.
You know what I was doing last night?
No, but whatever it was, you sound very excited.
It's my party and my husband doesn't want to dance with me.
I'll dance with you.
Maybe we have to take more risk.
So now you're falling in love with someone else, you're taking that risk.
Think what's happening between us.
You cannot change someone like him. What they think, what they want to do.
I think I'm falling in love with you.
Say that to another image.
I say it when I feel it.
You say it when it works for you.
I felt something that I hadn't felt in a very long time.
This is what always happens, we just forget.
Really outstanding. Your last two films have taken place in European countries and have centered on European characters and actors. What is the draw to Europe? I mean, obviously, the incredible history of wonderful films, but personally for you, you said Passages was originally set to be shot in New York.
Yeah. Well, the last film I made before this was a film called Frankie, and it was inspired by a wonderful Satyajit Ray film that was about a family on a vacation. So I always knew I'd make that film somewhere. And I was working with a French European producer, Saïd Ben Saïd.
Yeah.
And so we ended up in Portugal. My co-writer's part Portuguese, and it was just this place that I felt very inspired by. Certainly the relationship between my own work and my imagination in European cinema has brought me a lot to Europe. It turns out that Paris, New York City, and Memphis are probably the three cities I know best. I lived in Paris in 1986 when I was a college student. I spent 3 or 4 months there. I didn't speak French, and I ended up going to the movies mostly because I was so lonely. And I saw like 197 movies in
3 months. Wow.
And my life was changed. And I discovered a lot of, it was the first time I'd seen John Cassavetes. It was the first time I'd seen Vincent Minnelli, but also Maurice Pialat, Truffaut, Ackerman, a lot of French cinema that I've been very engaged with. And I've been going back to Paris often over the last 30 years since that point. And I've had relationships there, and I've had sex there, and I've cried, and I've had a lot of life there. So it feels very easy for me to imagine. I think also my particular domestic and nuclear life is looks a bit like this. My husband's Ecuadorian. My kids are bilingual. My co-writer's Brazilian. My script supervisor's Romanian. My producer's Tunisian. And that kind of has just been the life that I'm attracted to people who speak 2 languages, which is not me.
Yeah, that's funny. I don't have an easy grace with secondary languages either. I've always struggled trying to learn Spanish or Japanese or German. It doesn't attach itself to me very easily.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm very envious of people who learn languages very easily, and sort of fascinated by them. And I think, yeah, I tend to surround myself with people from other cultures. My sister-in-law is from South Africa, and she grew up speaking 5 languages. So it just, it's commonplace, and people in
Well,
Europe
it's a
typically do
it's
too.
it's a sense, and I think it's why it's been so important for us that our kids learn Spanish, and really is that it's a sense that the world is not your world is not the world.
Right.
There are other worlds, and I think that's a very profound thing to understand through
Yeah.
language.
Oh, very much so. I think it's like one of the great gifts that you can give a child. My mom spoke Italian, but she never taught me, and I got so mad at her. I'm like, I would have loved to have grown up speaking Italian, even if it was the
Generational.
Neapolitan dialect. Yeah.
It's generational. It's just
Yeah.
there was a certain sense that people didn't do that, and I also have to say that I've found money in Europe, and that's very significant.
Talk to me about that, Ira, please, because I've been making films, very much on an independent shoestring budget for years, and I'm not getting, the kind of advances that I was hoping to get in terms of distribution or attention. And my professor in college said, "Move to Europe." At 21 years old, he said, "I see the kind of writing you do. You're not going to have flat out. You're not going to have a career in the United States with the kind of stories you want to tell, the way you want to tell them. Move to Europe." I was too intimidated to do that. But talk to me about the cultural differences in terms of money, right? And filmmaking is not inexpensive. Even the most independent films cost several $1,000,000.
Yeah.
What is it that?
Well, there's actually a system of government support, and
Right.
that system doesn't pay for everything, and it certainly didn't pay for this film. But that being said, there's still a very thriving cinema culture in France. So everyone that I worked on this film with, from every crew member, they'd come in on Monday and they'd talk about what films they'd seen, and what those films were like the newest thing that came from Taiwan, and something that they heard about from Chile. And it was like they're very engaged. People are still actively engaged in a kind of cinema. So when you have a culture, you also have some different kind of economy.
Yes.
That being said, I think because I've had I think France, Keep the Lights On, Love Is Strange, and Little Men collectively were well received in that country, and that made there grew some interest in my work, particularly that made it possible for me to work within that system.
You spoke earlier about how you approached making Passages. Is that approach different for every film?
Which element?
How you come to realize a film, how you come to approach the casting or the location scouting, or how you'll work with the actors.
Yeah, I think you have things that you can rely on that you've done before, and then every film there's new things which you have to risk. And so, and I'm working on a new short, like a 1-hour film project right now, and I'm certainly, I have a lot of resources and experience, and I still have to work really hard, and it can be very scary to try to figure out the way to approach this film. Every film is a bit different. That being said, I have 30 plus years of experience, and I'm comfortable with what that experience has taught me. One difference I would say about Passages, and I'm interested in the effect of this, is it's a film that's totally made experienced in the present. There's almost no past in this film. People don't talk about the past. They don't reflect about the past. And I think that is something I like in the film, and I hope to kind of carry forward.
As you mentioned that, it occurs to me that when Tomas comes home and tells Martin of his interest in Agathe, he almost isn't really that flustered. He's like, "Oh, you're at it again, right? There he goes, back at it." It's like he has this history of being eccentric and a little bit emotionally reckless and impetuous, and so it's still very immediate and in the present, but there's a sense of a history that's not too on the nose or articulated, which is great. It's very
Well, I think that's the real
dynamic.
challenge, is how to get people enough that they believe that there's a very full world with its own logic and its own reality and its own past and its own future. So you have to figure out exactly how much, and not exact. I mean, when I say exact, that's part of editing. That's really an editing. It's a little bit writing, and then it's editing where you sense that I have an instinct as a storyteller
Mhm.
about how much people need to feel well taken care of. They have to trust me
Right.
as a storyteller.
This goes back to what you said earlier, though, about blocking and framing and having, one character's back obstructing the other character's face and not being able to see the expressions of the character they're speaking to. It's again
The facial expressions.
the facial expressions, not the corporeal expressions. We're
Yeah.
getting the corporeal expression, but not the facial
Yeah.
expression of the other character or actor. It's part and parcel with what you just said in terms of the writing and withholding.
Yeah,
And editing.
I don't even call it necessarily withholding. I would actually call it without overwriting. It's
Okay.
not that I'm holding back. I'm just trying not to be too literal, because then it doesn't feel life-like, which is different than life.
Does that is that a long and challenging process for you? Because I know when I write fiction, my first couple of drafts are always overwritten. I feel like I need to explain everything to everybody because I'm so terrified that they're going to miss everything. And
Yeah.
then for editing for me and revising for me is a process of paring back and scaling down and removing.
Well, I'll say what happens is that Mauricio, who writes the first draft, he overwrites, and then I start directing. So
Okay.
my job is actually to pare back. Like he'll write where the last script we wrote, there was a 120-page draft, and now we have a 95-page script. So for me, I'm like, I look at things and I think, often when things aren't working, I think for a moment, I have to fix this. And then I realize if they're not, there might be another reason for them not working, is because we don't need it.
Yeah, the utility aspect of it as well.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears for a moment and talk about Turn the Lights On, your 2012 film. I think it was pretty well documented by journalists in the interviews that you gave that it was based on some level on your relationship with the writer and literary agent Bill Clegg.
Yeah.
What was it like for you and for Bill to tell a story based on something so real and intimate?
I can't tell you what it was like for Bill, but and ultimately it was an autobiographically rooted and written film, which ended up being, the actors were not the same people, so it becomes something different in the making, and I think that's very important to me. I think in some ways, any film I want to have enough resources that I'm like a bit of an expert. Like I know this world. That's often people say, why do you choose filmmakers? I'm like, because I'm a filmmaker. It's pretty, it means that I can really quickly think, for example, in Passages, I can think of an arc without having to study, meaning like the arc of this film is he's finished, he's on the last day of the shoot, and then eventually he's going to finish the film and go to a festival. And so there's an arc. And I know that intrinsically because that's the life I've lived. What I found in writing autobiographical material is it's not a therapeutic process at all for me. I've sort of I have to feel that I'm on the other side of the angst. Like I'm almost become the therapist more than the subject. I'm the one who's able to attend to, and I'm also just trying to look at the story eventually. What does the story ask? Not what was the truth. Truth doesn't interest me very much. Except for the truth of the film.
Right. Exactly. I was going to say like the thematic truth or the emotional truth. Exactly. I can relate to that. We'll be taking questions for Ira in a few minutes, so please start sending them in. I have a few questions of my own. You directed my favorite living actress, Isabelle Huppert, in Frankie in 2019. As I said earlier, the piano teacher remains one of my favorite performances by an actress ever. What was it like working with her? I have to ask that personally. And how much does she make a character her own? It seems to me she does something magical, and I can't, like something ineffable that I can't quite pin down.
Well, I've never met anyone who who lives as more in the present than Isabel as an artist. Like, you're directing her, and she's been directed by, some of the very, very great filmmakers of the last many, many years.
Yeah.
But that's never at hand, because she's trying to figure out how to make the moment we're in alive.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
there's almost like slightly like what I'm saying for my own films, and maybe I learned something from Isabel about this, is that she lives in the present, and so the films do too.
Yeah.
She wants to be good, and she wants to be authentic, and she wants to, and she also really, really enjoys making movies. Like, people talk about how she works a lot, she makes a lot of things, but it's only because she likes to have experience. She loves, she's just as passionate, by the way, about like listening to the culture. These kind of programs right here, Isabel listens every Sunday in Paris to this kind of thing. She wants to know what people are making and what people are doing and what's exciting. And she's the only person who, like, I can think of, who comes to New York, and if she's here for 2 days and she says, anything you suggest, and you say, yeah, there's a Ed Ruscha show at MoMA, I think you'd like it. And then 3 days later, she's back in Paris. She said, I love the show. Like, she goes.
She actually goes. That's great.
That's
great.
She's Evan old school in a way. Like, I mean, I think John Lithgow is also a bit similar in that way. Like, he is devouring life. And that includes books and movies and plays and, music. And I love that.
It's like a real genuine interest in what you do. It's not just a job. And it sounds like a lot of it is without ego, which is really wonderful and refreshing to hear, that it's about the craft, it's about the making of the thing. You're making a thing together.
Yes. Wonderful people.
Your films, as I said before, they're very layered and complex and very personal. They almost feel like a novel. Have you ever toyed with the idea of writing one? I know you're a filmmaker, but
during the pandemic, when I thought the world would never be what it, not only would it change, but we'd never make films, and I was pretty depressed, and I ended up starting to write, and I wrote more memoir than fiction. I'm not very interested in writing fiction, and I did really like writing memoir, and I wrote quite a bit, and it's not bad. I think that I hold that in my back pocket, because one day I won't be able to make movies. Like, I won't get the money, or, I'll be too old or something. And I really I thought it was very different to write prose. It was almost more intensely personal than anything I do in film, to be honest. Because to write a paragraph and to write sentences.
I mean, it's like a direct message.
It's also just a direct conversation. I would say more than a message, it's a conversation with yourself that is, I found really, really enjoyable. I didn't have very much, I couldn't write for very long. It was too hard for me, but I did write. I don't have stamina because I don't have experience.
Sure. Well, you should talk a little bit about the Queer Art Cinema series that you founded in 2009 at the IFC Center in New York. Please tell us a little bit about that, and are you still actively engaged with it?
Well, I started a program I started two things around the same year, which was just after the Obama election, which I'd been involved in. And I realized that as a director, I'm a bit of a community organizer, and then I had certain skills. I got involved with Obama's campaign. I enjoyed that, but I was not going to be a political activist. Like, it just wasn't wasn't for me. That being said, I had organizational skills that I wanted to put to use, and I organized two things. One was a program called Queer Art Film at the IFC, which was a monthly series in which we invited an artist to present a film that had given them permission to be the person and the film and the artist that they were. And we've saw 150 different people went through that program, that series. Then we also started a mentorship program called Queer Art Mentorship. And now there's an organization called Queer Art, which houses these various programs. It's been around for 12 years. And, we've gone from like a $30,000 to now we're like a $600,000-$700,000 organization. We have full-time staff, and I remain very, very involved because I see community being created, and it's incredibly beautiful. And I look up queerart.org online, and you'll learn a lot about something that I think is quite unique in this country.
Well, the organization is really fantastic and valued. I have one final question, and then we will go to the viewers' questions. I read that you're working on a film about photographer Peter Hujar with Ben Whishaw.
Yes,
really exciting. Can you talk to us a bit about it?
Sure. It's actually a very specific project. In 1974, Peter Hujar, the photographer, and his friend Linda Rosenkrantz sat together in her apartment. She had invited Peter over to tell her about his day. She had an idea to do a collection of interviews with artists describing their day. So she did this multi-hour interview with Peter. Then she lost the tape, didn't publish the book. And 50 years later, someone found the transcript of this conversation in the Morgan Library in the Hujar archive, and they published it as a book. I read the book and I was like, I love this. I love what they're talking about. I love the intimacy of this friendship. I love this picture perfect kind of window into a certain kind of life that existed in New York in 1974. And I decided to make a film, and with Ben, we're making a film of that afternoon. So it's a 2-character, 1-day piece.
Wow. And you're shooting that in the spring?
I'm shooting that in April. Yeah.
Okay. Will it be out by the end of the year, you know?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's such an art project. It's not a feature. Yeah. It's its own little thing. We're shooting in Westbeth, who's been a great partner for us.
That is great.
And has a great legacy of being an artist space. So that's what I'm working on.
We'll look out for it. It sounds really intriguing. So here are some questions. Ira, are you working on another film in the near future? Well, you just answered that question. So,
yeah.
So, who are your favorite directors?
I exist as an artist in conversation with a number of directors who are always better than me, who always beat me, who are my cinematographer said they are your monsters because they are the people in the room that I'm always in conversation with. I think particularly I applied to film school when I got out of college. I didn't get into any film school, and I'm taught by those people. I'm taught by the films of Maurice Pialat, who I think probably mentioned before, who made films like Nos Amours and Lulu with Isabelle, and made about 10 extraordinary features. Chantal Akerman's Je tu il elle is a film that means a lot to me. For this film, there was a movie called Taxi Zoom Clos that was made in 1981 in Germany by a director named Frank Riplow, which is the most kind of open, gay, like it's a form of memoir that is so brave that I really, really love. Jean Eustache is a very important filmmaker for me. Made The Mother and the Whore. Ozu was a late discovery, but has been really significant. This can go on and on.
Yeah, I know. It's always so hard to name your favorite writers or filmmakers or artists. You can give a list of 30 very easily. And to that point, do you have a favorite film? Or there must be more than one. Is there just one?
No, I don't. I mean, there's many that kind of exist. There's a wonderful film by Eustache called My Little Loves, which I think if I was on an island, it would be the film that I wanted to be with me because I find it so incredibly. I find every second of it beautiful. It just moves me. Bresson's film. Ezard Balthazar about a donkey is very important. And I would say every film by Fassbinder, which to me is all one film. So
he died at 38 and made 40 great films. It's astounding, his career.
Fassbinder had a great motto, which I like. I really, whenever I tell someone else this, I'm telling myself it. He said, "Fix it in the next one."
Just keep working, keep going, move on to the next one. Yeah. I love it. Thank you, Eve. He put the queer art links in the comment section. So if you're curious about that, just search them out in our comment section and you will be able to, there you go, learn more about Ira's program, his wonderful program. Passages is currently on Mubi with a subscription. You could also rent it or buy it on Amazon, Apple, or Vudu. Ira, thank you so much for this hour. We really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful conversation. And thank you, everybody, for watching.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Eve. It's great to be here.